Hello and welcome to the Storm of Scripture. I'm Jeff Johnson. Today we are looking at Revelation chapter 5. In Revelation 5, John sees a scroll in the hand of the one seated on the throne. This scroll is written on the inside and back and is remarkably similar to the scroll that Ezekiel saw in his vision in Ezekiel chapter 2. In fact, the parallels between Ezekiel's vision at the beginning of his book and this vision of John in Revelation 4 and 5 are so significant that I believe that understanding the relationship between these two visions may go a long way in helping us understand what is going on with these first few chapters in the book of Revelation. Coupled with that is the fact that John breaks down and weeps when he realizes that there is no one who can just stand up and readily open the seals on the scroll. John's deep emotional response and the connections with Ezekiel will help us move forward as we examine the treasures in Revelation chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. All right, we are continuing our look at Revelation and starting chapter 5. As I was thinking about this chapter, it begins with a mention of a scroll, and I knew that the scroll had some precedent in the vision of Ezekiel. And we've already been looking at Ezekiel pretty heavily because there are so many close connections with Ezekiel chapter 1 and the vision that John has with the living creatures, the throne, the one sitting on the throne, a lot of similarities and resonances between Revelation chapter 4 and Ezekiel chapter 1. And then the scroll that is in Ezekiel comes up in chapter 2, and we're about to meet a scroll in Revelation chapter 5. As I was pondering these connections, I had an insight, whether it was the Holy Spirit giving me insight or just a connection in my head. I won't say for certain one way or the other, but it started to be a connection that I found quite compelling, to the point that I feel like these connections with Ezekiel are more than just saying that John is standing in the line of the prophets. I think it definitely does say that. But I'm wondering now if Ezekiel's vision is not meant to set a precedent that John is following. A precedent that follows to a point and then diverges. And I think the divergence and the pondering of why is John's experience different than Ezekiel's becomes an important point for appreciating what's going on in the book of Revelation. So I want to step through the Ezekiel vision, just some of the salient points, and then look at John and what happens with him, and discuss why then there are some differences. So starting back in Ezekiel, I'm not going to go into Ezekiel chapter 1. We did that quite exhaustively last week. We're going to start with Ezekiel chapter 2. And I'm going to be quoting from the Lexham English Septuagint. This is an English translation of the Greek Septuagint version of Ezekiel. I make this choice for a couple of reasons. One, as I was looking at the Lexham English Bible, which is based on the Masoretic text, which most of our English Bibles are, and then I looked at the Lexham English Septuagint, I saw that the Septuagint just phrases some things a little more like, in more concise ways. The Septuagint is understood to be a translation of the Hebrew into Greek, and the translator apparently clarified some phrasing or rephrased some things in some ways that are not contrary to the original, but are just easier to grasp at a glance, if you will. And also the Septuagint, as many of you probably know, was the most common version of the New Testament. Was the most common version of the Old Testament circulating at the time of the New Testament. And so the Greek version of the story of Ezekiel would have been more common. And a lot of the exact word phrases that are used in John's Revelation are found in Ezekiel's Greek version because the exact wording is in Greek. So the Greek wording is used in John's description and in Ezekiel. So that's one reason why I am going to be citing from the Septuagint as I cite back to Ezekiel. And it's not contrary, and in some places in the Septuagint are quite divergent from the original Masoretic, and then read like, where did this come from? Because the Masoretic text in the Septuagint is just so different at points. They are not that different when it comes to Ezekiel. But some of the phrasing, I think, just comes through clear. So that's why I'm choosing the Septuagint. You can always go back, and I encourage you to go back and read it in your own Bibles and do your own study on it if you wish. But here's Ezekiel 2, 1 and 2 from the Septuagint. This was the vision of the likeness of the Lord's glory. And that's kind of a summary of chapter 1. What he said this was, that's all that he's described to that point. And I saw and fell on my face, and I heard the voice of one speaking. And he said to me, Son of man, stand upon your feet, and I will speak to you. And the Spirit came upon me, and took me up, and lifted me up, and made me stand on my feet, and I heard him speaking to me. Down to verse 8 in Ezekiel. And you, son of man, listen to the one speaking to you. Do not become rebellious, just like the rebellious house. And from the context, it's clear he's talking about the rebellious house of Israel. Open your mouth and eat what I give you. And I looked, and look, a hand was stretched out toward me, and in it was the roll of a document. And it unrolled before me, and in it was written things on the front and things on the back. And in it had been written a complaint, and a dirge, and a woe. Now, just going into the first part of chapter 3, which is also, I think, relevant. First 3 verses, Ezekiel 3. And he said to me, Son of man, eat this roll, and go and speak to the children of Israel. And he opened my mouth, and he fed me the roll. And he said to me, Son of man, your mouth shall eat, and your belly shall be filled by this roll, which has been given to you. And I ate it, and it became as sweet as honey in my mouth. So that's Ezekiel's experience. Of course, it goes on from there, but basically Ezekiel sees the vision of the throne. He sees it in the storm cloud, and then it sort of clarifies for him as the storm cloud rises that what he's seeing is a vision of God's throne. He sees the living creatures all around it, and of course the wheels with the eyes, and all of that is in chapter 1. And then he hears the voice calling him up, and he is in the Spirit, and then he is shown a scroll, which is unrolled, and he is told that his message to the house of Israel, is on the scroll. And he is to eat the scroll, which seems to mean take in the message. It's symbolic, visionary experience to say, take this message in, make it a part of you, and then tell it to the people of Israel. Express this message. So his calling is given in a visionary experience of taking in a scroll, which is unrolled in front of him. Now let's compare that to what has happened with John along the way. Going back to Revelation chapter 4, in the first couple of verses, after these things I looked, and behold, and notice how that common phrase, I looked and look, and basically I looked and behold is the same phrase. So it's definitely echoing even the wording of what happened with Ezekiel. I looked, and behold, an open door in heaven, and the former voice that I had heard like a trumpet speaking with me was saying, Come up here, and I will show you these things which must take place after these things. And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one was seated on the throne. So then throughout the rest of chapter 4, John sees what is similar to Ezekiel's vision when he beholds it. But then we come to Revelation 5, verse 1. And I saw in the right hand of the one who is seated on the throne a scroll, written inside and on the back, sealed up with 7 seals. So to a point, this tracks with Ezekiel's vision. He is called up by the Spirit. He is in the Spirit, in the throne room. He sees a scroll, but there's where it's different. For Ezekiel, the scroll was unrolled, and he was to take in a message from the scroll and then convey it to the people of Israel. But here's the problem. For John, the scroll is not unrolled. For John, the scroll is sealed. So John comes into the throne room, and he is unable to receive the message. For one thing, the scroll isn't handed to him, as it was for Ezekiel. Instead, the one on the throne continues to hold it. And for two, it's sealed. Now, John can see that it's written on the inside and on the back. You can see if it's written on the back, even if it's rolled up, because you can see the writing on the scroll. So you know it's written on the back, and I guess he assumes it's written on the front. Can't see the front, but he can see that it's written all over the scrolls, which is exactly like the scroll that Ezekiel saw, written on the front and on the back. But John can't receive the message because the scroll is sealed. I think that begs the question to any reader who's familiar with Ezekiel, and I believe the references and allusions that we've seen from now assume that the reader is familiar with Ezekiel and is tracking with that story. And then here is a difference. The scroll is sealed. John doesn't receive the message that's on the scroll right away. Instead, something else happens in verse 2. And I saw a powerful angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" That would resolve the problem. If somebody can open the scroll, then John can receive the message and then convey it. If that's what he's there to do, that's what one would assume he's there to do, because that's what Ezekiel had happened with him. And yet, he can't, so the angel questions it. This is another example of this being a divine council type meeting where God is working through his delegates. Because it's not God who asks the question. It's not the one seated on the throne who asks for someone worthy to step up. It's an angel, a powerful angel working on God's behalf and delivering God's question to the audience. Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals? In the past, in divine council meetings where questions are asked, usually an angel, or sometimes more than one, go and stand up. When Ahab's doom is to be sealed and there's a divine council meeting and God says, who's going to make sure Ahab dies? One of the angels. In fact, it says one angel said this and one angel said that. They were all making suggestions, but one angel stood up and said, I'll deceive him into thinking he's going to fight this battle and win. And then I'll just take him into the battle and he'll die in battle. And God says, okay, that's what we're going to do. But we get the sense, or I do, I think scholars have got the sense that that's the typical method of using the divine council. God states his intention, and the divine council each steps up and says, here's how I would do it, here's how I would do it, and God allows one of them to go forward with their design. So he collaborates with his divine council. Well, here, the question is asked, not by God directly, but by this powerful angel, who is going to open the scroll? Who is worthy to open it? Well, if people stand up, we don't have the individual suggestions, but we do find out in verse 3, no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or even to look into it. Of course, you can't look into it if you can't open it. But no one's worthy of either one. A scroll like this, in the hand of a king, God is king of heaven and earth, but it was a typical idea to seal a royal decree. I think we can conclude that what we have in his hand is a royal decree, just as it was for Ezekiel. And Ezekiel received God's royal decrees for what was going to happen. That was his message. Throughout the rest of the book of Ezekiel, he is at one point or another delivering God's decrees, what is going to happen with Israel in exile, because Israel was already in exile at the time of Ezekiel's vision. But this is the decree. Now God has a new decree and a new messenger, John, except the decree can't be read because it's sealed. And so the decree has to be unsealed before it can be read, and John is apparently not the one to do it. It has to be unsealed before then. Something is up with this decree, and there has to be someone who is worthy to open it. God has not just made the decree itself, but has sealed it, meaning certain conditions need to be met before the decree is going to be read and enacted. There are three realms that someone who is worthy in all three has to approach. There are certainly worthy people in heaven. I mean, we're going to see Michael later on in the book of Revelation, and he has been one of God's powerful angels. Gabriel himself is the one who interpreted the revelation to Daniel. So we have worthy representatives in heaven, perhaps, but they're not worthy to break these seals. Are there worthy people on earth? Well, possibly. Mary was worthy to be the mother of Jesus because of her virtue. There are worthy, righteous people. There's John. John himself. Why couldn't John open this? He's a worthy representative on earth, wouldn't he be? Maybe, but not worthy to break these seals. What about under the earth? What about the realm of the dead? Is there anybody worthy in the realm of the dead who could open the seals? We have David. David is in there, and we have Moses. We have some worthy representatives in the realm of the dead who have delivered God's message in the past, but they're not worthy to break these seals. We are looking at an impasse. And this impasse so gravely impacts John that he begins to weep. In verse 4, Revelation 5:4, I began to weep loudly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look in it. To me, this is one of the most powerful verses in this chapter. Because something that is going to so gravely emotionally impact John is phenomenal to me. This is the apostle who witnessed Jesus' crucifixion. He was the apostle who was right there at the foot of the cross while all the other ones ran off. He's experienced some great emotional distress in his life and come through it. He is himself in exile. He wasn't crying on Patmos. He wasn't crying when Jesus gave him difficult news to give to the churches, the 7 churches. There were some really harsh things there and some sad things that Jesus told him, but he didn't cry then. But he cries here. He cries when nobody can open the scroll. It seems like such a routine thing to open a scroll and to not be able to, but it's so powerful that he cries. To me, this is a moment to sit back and wonder, what is it about the scroll that makes John cry? We always debate what's on the scroll, and because never is it said, here is what's on the scroll, and we are given that content. And really, we aren't with Ezekiel either. I mean, he eats the scroll, so nobody actually reads it, they eat it. The message that's written on the scroll, doesn't really matter what is the words on the scroll. What matters is the message that's on the scroll. And that message needs to get out, but it's not going to. There are 2 reasons why he would weep. One is, he was brought to heaven to receive a message. The whole heavenly experience has to be a real heightened emotional moment, but now he can't receive his message. The whole experience will come to nothing if we can't open the scroll. And this is a transcendent experience. So let's not let this transcendent experience come to nothing. That would be something to cry over, because coming into God's presence and then leaving with nothing to show for it would be sad, because no one could open the scroll. But also, and here I'm showing my hand a little bit on some interpretive messaging. We had just read through those 7 messages of the 7 churches. Among them are some specific prophecies of tribulation for the church. A week or 10 days or a coming tribulation through the whole world is mentioned. There are these times of trouble that are going to be hitting the church. And we have Aristarchus, who has died already, because in Pergamum there was already Christians who had died, one by name, because of this persecution of Christians. I think that John was hoping to come into the heavenlies and to see the promise of vindication and of hope. And what's going to end this persecution? How can we get out of this? What is the hope that's going to come? For Ezekiel, when that happened, if John is already in his experience tracking with Ezekiel, the message to the people of Israel through Ezekiel was, yes, God has left the building, the temple building, but he is still with Israel, and he's still with you. His glory is, as Isaiah had put it, his glory is throughout the earth. So God's presence has not abandoned you, and there is still a plan for the future, and God will walk through this exile with you and will eventually end it. And there was a message of hope that came through Ezekiel. Harsh at times, but still hopeful. And I think John is entering into the heavenlies after hearing Jesus tell him about these harsh trials that the church is going to be going through, and he's looking for the message with maybe some difficulties in it, but ultimately of hope. But that message is sealed. Does that mean we're not going to see an end? Does that mean that whatever conditions it is that God has assigned, he's the one who sealed the scroll after all. The scroll is sealed by God's design, but whatever conditions need to be met aren't going to be met for things to change? Is that the message I'm going to bring back to the church? That, sorry, things aren't fixed yet? Or not going to be? That would be a very sad message to have to bring back to the church. Well, I think that's a combination of things are all overwhelming John emotionally, to the point that he breaks down and cries in heaven over this scroll not being opened. But one of the elders steps off one of those 24 thrones to speak to him in verse 5. One of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals." So first, it is one of the elders. Up to this point, we could imagine John standing back and watching this unfold as if on a screen, as if he's seeing some sort of broadcast, televised event. But he's an observer. Always the prophet interacts with the environment. In Daniel chapter 7, when Daniel sees the Ancient of Days sitting on his throne, and all around him are thrones sat, and he sees what's going on. When Daniel, who is also troubled, another interesting parallel, Daniel is troubled by what he sees. He goes and talks to one of those, presumably one of those attendants on the throne around God, and asks him a question. What is all of this about? But he interacts with it. Isaiah, in his vision, he sees this and feels overwhelmed, and not with sadness or with worry, but with guilt. He feels like he's not worthy to be there, nor worthy to carry God's message on his sinful tongue. So one of the angels takes a tong and a hot coal and puts it on his tongue. Personally, I would rather wash out with soap, but he goes with the hot coal as purifying agent. So he purifies Isaiah's tongue. It would also make it hard to carry a message after your tongue has been touched with a hot coal, but that aside, it's visionary language of purifying. But each prophet, when he stands in the presence of the king, is there. He is physically there. He is not seeing a projection of a vision. He is in the presence of God, interacting with the elements in the vision, because he's there. It's an actual experience, not just a dream in which he observes. And then the elder says, there is someone who can open the seals. The Lion of the tribe of Judah and the Root of David. He has conquered so that he can open the scroll and the 7 seals. It's interesting he doesn't say Jesus. John has just been talking to Jesus by name on Patmos with his earlier vision, but here doesn't say, behold, Jesus has conquered. He uses two references to him, the Lion of the tribe of Judah and the Root of David. These are messianic references, particularly Israel, Jewish messianic references to the Messiah. The tribe of Judah and the Root of David. Here we go all the way back to the 12 tribes, and we're back to Jacob and the tribes of Israel, but also David. This is looping Jesus into that whole great history, going all the way back to Genesis and the tribes of Jacob, and then into David and his messianic promise. And Jesus is the fulfillment of both of those, those visions of the Messiah as it developed over time. Because the lion was often a regal image, just generally in the ancient Near East, but in the prophecies given in Genesis by Jacob to the 12 sons, he mentions the scepter in Judah and how it will not depart until Shiloh comes. Shiloh being understood typically as a messianic figure. That's a whole rabbit trail in and of itself, but seen as a messianic figure. And then that royal scepter is held by Shiloh, the Messiah, who then is over all nations. So definitely a messianic and kingly message. And of course, David was a king. And so that points to the messianic kingship as the root of David and coming back there. So definitely, and he is the one who is worthy. He has conquered. Now, how did Jesus conquer? That has already been referenced in Revelation, in the greetings by John to the churches, and a little bit in the message to the churches. Jesus conquered by dying on the cross and then being resurrected from the dead and defeating death. Jesus was certainly, as one of the divine Trinity, the worthy representative of heaven. He is also a worthy representative of the earth as a man incarnated, living the perfect life as a human, and he is the one who has conquered under the earth in the realm of the dead by defeating death itself and being resurrected. So in all three realms, Christ is supreme, the King of heaven, earth, and under the earth. He is the King. And so he can open the scroll and the seven seals. It's interesting how many images are thrown at us in these couple of verses, Revelation 5 and 6. Is a lion, a root, which is like a tree image, and now a lamb is what we're going to be looking at next week.
Thank you for joining me today as we studied Revelation chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. As usual, I'd love to hear from you, either through a comment under the YouTube video or in the Facebook discussion group for this channel. And if you'd like to ask a direct question of me, you can always email storeroomofscripture@comcast.net. I look forward to seeing you again as we examine the treasures in the biblical text.